Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. Breaking off relationships almost always leaves emotional scars and turmoil, which do not heal quickly. People handle such situations differently. Some prefer to never see or speak to each other again to avoid reopening fresh wounds, while others remain friends. However, there are instances where ex-lovers are no longer together, but also unable to completely separate due to something shared that cannot be quickly dissolved. In situations where former lovers start new relationships in each other's presence and continue to interact, it can lead to unpredictable outcomes. The story of Ildiko Kranjak, a successful entrepreneur and owner of a high-end spa salon in California, resembled a fairy tale but ended abruptly and tragically. Initially, there were suggestions of an accident, an attack, or rival machinations, but the truth turned out to be far grimmer. A devastating event befell the successful and attractive woman at the hands of someone she once loved and trusted immensely. Who is Ildiko Kranjak? Childhood, early years. A girl named Ildiko Kranjak was born on June 8, 1969, in the city of Miskolc in northeastern Hungary, and was the younger of two children in a middle-class family. Her mother, Juliana, worked as a nurse in the Department of Plastic and Reconstructive Surgery, but later, in the 1980s, retrained in aesthetic medicine, which was becoming increasingly popular, and opened her own clinic. The family patriarch, Laszlo Kranjak, was a simple worker, and spent most of his life laboring at a local factory, striving to provide for his family. Ildiko's elder brother, named after their father, was only a few years older than her. From early childhood, the siblings got along well and were nearly inseparable. Following in their father's footsteps, her brother gained an engineering degree and worked at the same machine-building plant for a while, before starting his own small business in their hometown. Ildiko was naturally creative and imaginative from childhood, feeling constrained not only in Miskolc, but also in conservative Hungary. She dreamed of traveling the world, seeing other cities and countries, establishing her business, achieving success and recognition, and breaking free from the ordinariness in which her family lived. After finishing school, young Kranjak enrolled in a medical college and later obtained a license to work in aesthetic cosmetology. Inspired by her mother's example, she aimed to achieve more and become a true star in her field. Her first success came when she was just 20 years old. The budding specialist skillfully built her career, independently developing a business plan and strategy. She quickly built up a client base and started earning decent money by her city's standards. Ildiko constantly strived to learn and improve her skills, staying up to date with all the latest innovations in cosmetology, aesthetic medicine, and the beauty industry at large. However, she understood that her opportunities at home were limited and that, as a specialist, she would soon reach their ceiling. To move forward, she would need to find a place that offered more chances to fully realize her potential. After earning a bachelor's degree in medical aesthetics, the ambitious young Kranjak decided to take action. Moving to the USA. The ambitions of this young woman were enviable, though few believed she would truly embark on such radical changes, as Ildiko was very close to her family and seemed unlikely to ever leave her parents. However, in the summer of 1992, shortly after celebrating her 23rd birthday, Ildiko decided to realize her lifelong dream and moved across the ocean to the United States of America. Chasing the American dream, the determined Hungarian gambled everything and took the risk. It was not just a move, but a desire to completely change her life. She gathered all the money she had saved, bought a one-way plane ticket, and set off for another continent. There, she had no relatives, no friends, nor acquaintances. Nobody was waiting for her and she barely knew any English, but she took that step into the unknown. Her parents had mixed feelings about their daughter's decision, but no one tried to stop her since she was already an adult and could make such serious decisions independently. Nevertheless, her relatives were very concerned about how her life would unfold in a foreign land. Ildiko decided to head straight to sunny California, where she planned to look for a job, learn the language and, so to speak, put down roots. The move was a real culture shock for her. After living in conservative, prim and cold Hungary, America indeed seemed like a fairy tale and a place where all dreams come true. Initially, the young woman stayed in a budget hostel, trying to save money since she still had to find a job, which was not easy without knowing the language. However, luck soon smiled on her and she was hired as an assistant to a master stylist in one of the local beauty salons. The salary allowed her to rent a decent apartment and provide for her basic needs. But to work in the field of cosmetology and aesthetic medicine, Krajniak needed to master the language well and obtain the appropriate medical license in the US. With no connections or acquaintances, Ildiko could only rely on her own strength. She worked diligently, dedicating all her free time to learning English and improving her communication skills. Her perseverance and hard work soon paid off. She successfully passed the required exams and obtained a license allowing her to work in cosmetology. Leading specialist. Just a couple of years after moving, Ildiko became the leading specialist at a spa center in an elite 5-star hotel frequented by show business stars and other celebrities. She earned a reputation as the best cosmetologist in town, with bookings made months in advance. Additionally, as a professional, she constantly educated herself and advanced her qualifications. She attended international exhibitions and seminars, had an excellent understanding of the compositions of cosmetic products and treatments, and easily helped clients resolve almost any aesthetic skin issues. Beyond her professional skills, the young woman possessed superb diplomatic qualities. She easily and effortlessly made useful contacts and influential friends, quickly established relationships with business partners, and had a natural business acumen. Krajniak was not content to always work for others and dreamed of opening her own salon, which would be the best not only in the city but throughout the state of California. By the mid-90s, the young Hungarian had become the most sought-after specialist at the center where she worked. Clients who had once visited her for treatment subsequently tried to book appointments only with this cosmetologist. Ildiko already understood that the client base she had built would stay with her, even if she changed her place of work. The management of the spa complex knew this too and therefore did everything possible to retain the specialist by creating the most favorable working conditions. Family life. Krajniak was open, friendly, sociable, and very beautiful, naturally attracting a lot of male attention and having many admirers. However, during her first years in the United States, she was more focused on learning the language, professional growth, and career advancement, pushing her personal life to not just a back burner but perhaps to the fifth priority. In 1995, she met a young man named Ramilo Vestal who had Asian roots and had immigrated to America with his family as a schoolboy. He had pursued a medical education and was working as a doctor at a local hospital. The couple quickly found a common language and romantic feelings developed between them. A year after meeting in the spring of 1996, they had a modest wedding attended only by their closest people. 2 years later, the couple welcomed their only child together, a son they named Keanu. The new parents adored their child, spending all their free time with family. Their home was filled with love and understanding, and everyone who knew them noted how harmoniously they complemented each other and how they radiated happiness when together. In the mid-90s, Ildiko convinced her cousin to also move to the United States, and she decided to relocate with her husband and children. The relatives settled near her home. They communicated closely, regularly visited each other, and their families became close friends. In 2000, after a long illness, Krasnjak's father passed away, which was a severe blow to the family. By that time, her elder brother Laszlo was already married, raising children and living in another city, leaving their mother Juliana alone in the family home, suffering from severe depression. Additionally, she began showing signs of dementia, making it unsafe to leave her alone. Ildiko decided to bring her mother to California so that the elderly woman wouldn't feel lonely and could spend her final years surrounded by family. For Juliana, moving to America was also a challenging step, but her daughter helped her adapt, surrounding her with love and care. Moreover, the grandmother was overjoyed to have the chance to dote on her grandson Keanu, whom she had previously only seen in photographs. Own business. In 2002, Krasnjak finally decided to open her own salon. By then, she had accumulated enough funds, gained business experience, and built an extensive client base. Supported by her loved ones, the young woman dared to risk everything. Ildiko established her spa salon in Aliso Viejo, California, located in the San Joaquin Hills of southern Orange County. She named it Magyar Cosmetica, which translates to Hungarian cosmetics. Soon her establishment earned a 5-star rating, and its fame spread throughout the state. In her work, Ildiko used only premium quality cosmetics, treatments, and equipment. She earned a reputation as one of the best cosmetologists, and she took great pride in this. The woman skillfully managed and developed her business, and she had chosen an excellent location for her salon. Her establishment was located in a major business center in Southern California, 10 miles from the popular Laguna Beach and about 70 miles from Los Angeles. For many years, the cosmetologist successfully developed her business, with her income steadily increasing. By the late 2000s, she and her husband had bought a luxurious large house, where they moved with their son and Krasnjak's mother. The woman had her own driver and household assistants, could afford anything she desired, and lived the life she had always dreamed of. Moreover, it is worth noting that Ildiko herself was a living advertisement for her salon. She always looked stunning and seemed not to age at all. She also continuously enhanced her qualifications, obtained an international medical certificate, and could practice in virtually any country. Over time, the cosmetologist also began to conduct training seminars and courses for professionals in the field. For many years, Krasnjak engaged in her beloved work, striving to be the best. She developed business strategies, researched the market to stay competitive, found reliable suppliers, and devised advertising campaigns. And all this did not prevent her from continuing to personally see clients who sought her services specifically. For her only beloved child, the woman paid for education in an elite private school, music lessons with the best teachers, and language courses. From her experience, she knew how important it was to master several foreign languages and how useful this could be in life. In 2016, Keanu became a student at a prestigious university and went to study in Washington. Crisis and the last vacation. The year 2017 started off as an exceptionally tough one for Ildiko. The business center, which had housed her spa salon for over 15 years, suddenly changed ownership. The new owner quickly made it clear that he had his own plans for the building in a prestigious area, and thus the leases with the tenants were swiftly terminated. Ildiko was not prepared for such a turn of events and had to immediately look for a new location to relocate. For Krasnjak, the situation was a major stressor. She faced colossal losses and tried to find a suitable place close to the old one. She stayed in Aliso Viejo, but moved from the luxurious business center to a 2-story commercial building, occupying half of the first floor. The move itself also amounted to a significant expense, as it involved transporting a large amount of expensive equipment that required careful handling. Additionally, the new location needed some cosmetic repairs before it could be operational. In March 2018, when the main work was completed and the spa salon reopened at the new location, a work-weary and stressed Ildiko decided to take a small vacation. She flew to Portugal for 2 weeks, relaxing under the warm sun at a popular beach resort. It seemed that the difficulties were behind her, and she was quick to make up for lost time. A month later, Laszlo flew to California to visit his sister and elderly mother. They communicated well, spent quality time together, and even took a family trip to Washington to surprise Keanu at university. On May 5th, Ildiko and her brother flew to their native Hungary. The man was returning home to his family, while for Ildiko, it was a business trip which she decided to combine with a visit to relatives she had not seen in a long time. She returned home with innovative treatments that provided stunning rejuvenating effects, eager to put them to use. Unfortunately, less than a week later, the salon into which she had poured her soul was destroyed and she herself was found dead. Accident, attack, or planned crime. On May 15, 2018, around 1 o'clock in the afternoon, the emergency services received consecutive reports of a powerful explosion and fire in the commercial center housing Ildiko's spa salon. The blast was heard several blocks away, and frightened people speculated that it could have been an attack, fearing it might be the first in a series. Across the street from the destroyed building was a daycare, and parents, upon hearing what had happened, rushed there to ensure their children were safe. Fire trucks, ambulances, and several police patrols were immediately dispatched to the scene. The building itself was partially destroyed. Flames engulfed the interior, and the street was littered with debris from bricks, glass shards, and roofing fragments. At that time, it was unclear how many people were inside at the time of the explosion, and whether there were any fatalities or injuries. Witnesses reported a loud bang and acrid smoke that quickly spread through the street, triggering car alarms in the vicinity. As rescuers moved closer to the epicenter of the explosion, the scene became increasingly horrific. Blood was everywhere inside, and under the debris and broken furniture, 2 injured people were found. Later, it was discovered they were a mother and daughter who had come for treatments at the spa on that fateful day. The women were concussed, lacerated by shards, and had severe burns. They were knocked unconscious by the blast wave, but fortunately, both were saved. Several other employees and clients sustained minor injuries and smoke inhalation and were taken to the hospital. But the most gruesome discovery awaited the rescuers. Behind the former reception desk, they found disfigured and severely burned human remains. Identification was not immediately possible, but it was soon confirmed to be the 48-year-old spa owner, Ildiko Krajniak, who was at the epicenter. Bomb disposal units were at the scene, as there was no certainty that another explosion would not occur. From the beginning, it was difficult to determine what exactly caused such a destructive blast and what had detonated. The initial theory of a gas leak and electrical short was quickly dismissed, as there was a specific point of explosion. The possibility of a terrorist act was investigated, though no other explosive devices were found in this or neighboring buildings. Another very plausible theory was that of a carefully planned crime against Ildiko. The deceased was a kind and open person, engaged in charity work, and always willing to help others. However, she was also a successful entrepreneur with many envious rivals and competitors who might have wanted to eliminate her radically. Each theory had to be checked, but first, it was necessary to speak with the victim's relatives and friends, as well as interview the surviving witnesses. At the same time, an emergency call came from a woman named Lori Stone, who could not reach her boyfriend, Stephen Bill. According to her, he was a co-founder of the spa salon and might also have been in the building at the time of the explosion. By witness accounts, the surviving mother and daughter suffered serious injuries, were urgently operated on, and were in intensive care. As soon as their condition stabilized slightly, they agreed to speak with law enforcement and recount everything that happened. On that day, the women were undergoing treatments at Krajniak's spa salon. They had been there before, knew the owner well, and everything was as usual during this visit until they went to the reception desk to pay for their cosmetic services. Ildiko often performed the duties of the receptionist herself and was at the desk at that moment. She was sorting through mail, and there was also a large package on the desk in front of her. She took the payment, issued the receipts to the clients, and then, continuing the casual conversation, took a box cutter and began to open that very box. At that moment, an unexpected, powerful explosion occurred, and everything after seemed like a blur. According to the daughter, she first saw a blinding flash followed by a deafening bang, then felt a wave of heat and realized she was flying through the air. In reality, she was thrown by the blast wave, but miraculously, she remained conscious, managed to find her mother amid the chaos, and dragged her to a destroyed wall for air, after which she lost consciousness and later woke up in the hospital. After speaking with the victims, there was no doubt that this was a premeditated crime, and the explosive device had been disguised as an ordinary package. The next steps were to identify a circle of suspects and determine who might not only wish the woman dead, but also carry it through. It was also unclear whether the target was solely Ildiko, or if her 59-year-old business partner Stephen Bill was also in mortal danger. Police were immediately dispatched to the man's home. Bill had just returned from a business trip and was greeted by a pile of packages at his doorstep. He was moved to a safe distance, and bomb disposal experts checked each box, but they only contained store orders, and no explosives were found. Stephen was questioned, but he appeared shocked by the news of Krajniak's death, and could not name anyone who might wish her harm. No longer spouses, just neighbors. The deceased husband, Ramilo Vestal, arrived at the scene as soon as he heard about the incident. He had hoped until the last moment that his wife might have survived, but upon hearing the tragic news, he was utterly devastated. However, it was also necessary to question him. At this point, a very curious detail emerged that only a few members of the Krasnjak family knew. It turned out that Ildiko and Ramilo had long ceased to be a couple in the conventional sense. They continued to live in their shared, large and luxurious house, had not formalized a divorce, and maintained a warm relationship. But in fact, they had become just neighbors to each other. In recent years, each had their own personal life. They did not feel jealousy towards one another, and were ready to let go completely if either of them found true love. This circumstance seems strange and very suspicious to the police. In the event of his wife's death, Ramilo, still being her legal spouse, would inherit the house, all the property, and the quite profitable business. However, this last aspect argued rather in favor of the man's innocence. Why would he destroy the spa salon, which was the main source of income for their family? Business partner and former lover. It was established that over the past couple of years, the deceased had been involved with at least 5 different men. Most of these were fleeting interests, but 2 names particularly drew the investigators' attention. A close friend of Kranjak revealed that the woman had been seeing a man named Nicholas for a few months, to whom she felt strong emotions, and did not rule out the possibility that their relationship could progress to a new level, even potentially leading to marriage. A week before the tragedy, the couple spent a weekend together in Sacramento, where they flew spontaneously, dropping all other engagements. Detectives quickly located this man and interrogated him, but he was found to have no involvement in the tragedy, and was as shocked by the events as anyone else, with no motive to harm the woman he loved. It then emerged that several months earlier, Ildiko had been closely involved with her business partner, Stephen Bill. When investigators looked into how they met and why they became partners, despite Bill having no previous ties to the beauty industry, a quite intriguing story surfaced. About a year and a half ago, when the woman faced serious business problems, was looking for a new location for the salon, and was experiencing significant losses, she met Stephen. He was charmed by her beauty, fell in love at first sight, and agreed to cover all the expenses associated with moving the spa center. He also invested a substantial sum into its development, becoming Krasniak's business partner. At the same time, they began a romantic relationship that lasted about 6 months. It is likely that the woman reciprocated out of gratitude, but she did not truly have deep feelings for Bill. In March 2018, they vacationed together in Portugal, but by that time Ildiko had already started an affair with Nicholas, and was constantly in touch with him by phone, which irritated Stephen. She broke up with him immediately upon returning. The former lovers continued to run the business together, and Bill did not give up trying to win her back, but she was already happy in her new relationship. He even tried to make her jealous by starting a relationship with Laurie Stone, but Krasniak was unaffected by this. She no longer cared. It is likely that Bill harbored resentment towards her and could have sought revenge. Strange hobby and skeletons in the closet. The police decided to take a closer look at Stephen, and discovered that he had a rather specific hobby. He was involved in making fireworks, and was well versed in pyrotechnics. The man did not deny this, and did not obstruct the search of his home. There, officers found professional equipment, materials for creating decorative fireworks and rockets, as well as gunpowder and other combustible chemicals. At that time, the police had no solid reason or evidence to detain Bill, and he was released. However, they decided to investigate his background further, and discovered that his wife had died under strange circumstances 10 years ago. Officially, the cause of death was pancreatitis, but it was preceded by a mysterious accident at home while they were moving furniture. It appeared that Stephen had provoked the incident, but nothing could be proven. Furthermore, he received a substantial insurance payout after becoming a widower, which also suggested a motive for murder. Arrest and trial. Several months later, detectives managed to find video surveillance footage from May 10th, showing Bill purchasing a mix of combustible chemical components and parts for making poppers, which were later found at the explosion site. Additionally, it was revealed that early on the morning of the tragedy, he visited the spa salon to leave the deadly package. He entered through the back door using his key and parked his car on a nearby street to remain unnoticed. On March 3, 2019, Stephen Bill was arrested on charges of premeditated murder, use of a weapon of mass destruction, and intentional destruction of a building. During the trial, several more charges were added, related to causing serious bodily harm. One of the women injured in the explosion lost an eye, while another suffered deep burns to her face and body. Although Bill pleaded not guilty, the evidence and testimonies collected were not in his favor. Moreover, witnesses said he had never reconciled with the fact that Ildiko had left him and he had begun to stalk her. Shortly before her death, the woman had confided to friends that she feared for her life and was concerned that her ex-lover might seek revenge. Only in early 2024 was Stephen Bill finally found guilty on all charges and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. All appeals submitted by him and his team of lawyers were rejected. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. Living in the neighborhood of death. People who have lived in the same place for a long time without moving generally know their neighbors well. They understand whom to trust and to what extent, and whom it's better to stay away from. Sometimes neighbors living side by side for years become closer than some family members. They are asked to look after the house and property while the family is away on vacation or traveling. They invite each other over, and without a second thought, allow their children to accept treats from these individuals. However, sometimes the person who has lived next door for many years can turn out to be a real maniac who has just been waiting for the right moment. The case of Diana Garnica became one of the most sensational in Argentina in recent years. A lot of effort and time went into the investigation, and the criminal could have escaped punishment as there was almost no direct evidence against him. He did not admit his guilt, and the victim's body was never found. Diana Abigail Garnica Cisneros was born on March 30, 2000, in the province of Tucumán, in the town of Villa Mariano Moreno, El Colmena, Argentina. She grew up in a poor, large family where she was the youngest daughter and the second to last child of her parents. Her parents, Ramon Garnica and Elizabeth Susana Cisneros, worked hard to provide for their many children and create at least somewhat comfortable living conditions for them. As the youngest girl in the family, Diana was everyone's favorite. Her parents adored her, and her older brothers and sisters took care of her. She did well in school, was talented in drawing, and from a young age, loved to dance. She was unusually intelligent and sensible for her age, never lied to her family, had no secrets from her mother and father, and was very close to her older sister Sonia, who essentially took care of her upbringing while their parents were at work. Since the Garnica family was quite religious, the parents, along with their children, regularly attended church and tried to live honestly and correctly. The older children also began working from their teenage years to help their parents somewhat. The younger ones kept the house in order and each had their responsibilities, which they were accountable for. Diana dreamed of becoming a doctor in the future because she always aimed to help those around her. Was very kind, sensitive, and responsive. She hoped to build a successful career, help her family, and said that she would buy her parents a big house, where her mom could plant a garden with flowers and fruit trees that she always dreamed of. Unfortunately, these dreams were never to be realized. Moving to a new city, parents divorce. In 2013, after Ramon lost his job due to worsening financial troubles, the family was forced to move to Juan Bautista Alberti, located in the same province of Tucumán. The move was extremely difficult for them, and initially their problems only increased. The relationship between the spouses, who had been together for over 2 decades, quickly deteriorated. They began to argue constantly and eventually decided that they could no longer stay together. The divorce was a severe shock for all the children, but the younger ones felt it most acutely. Diana, upon learning what had happened, was simply devastated. The world of a 13-year-old girl crumbled in an instant, and she simply could not understand what would happen next. Despite the separation, the father continued to support his ex-wife and children, but he soon started another family. Elizabeth also struggled greatly with the divorce, but her children supported her, and she was fortunate to find a decent job with a reasonable salary for that area. Gradually, the family adapted to their new reality, settled into their new home, made friends and established good relationships with nearby residents. Across from the Garnica family lived a certain Dario Javier Suarez. He was a very pleasant, friendly, and kind 36-year-old man. He lived with his wife, Yasmina Alejandra Villarreal, with whom he was raising 4 children. He also had 2 children from previous relationships, and 1 child out of wedlock. It's noteworthy that Dario and his family moved to Juan Bautista, Alberti just 6 months before the Garnicas settled there. Perhaps that's why they quickly became close friends, as they were newcomers to the area. Previously, Suarez had lived in the province of Santiago del Estero, in the northern part of Argentina. Dario, along with his wife, 2 brothers and some other relatives, worked at a local brick factory, located just a mile from their home. His children were about the same age as Diana and her siblings. They attended the same school, quickly found common ground, and became friends. The adults also got along well, allowing their children to visit each other, even staying overnight, celebrated family events together, and became almost like family. Sonia and Diana even babysat the youngest neighbor's children while their parents were at work. After the divorce, Ramon did what he could to help his ex-wife and older children. But after he started a new family, he nearly stopped sending money. The mother's job, although it provided a stable income, was disastrously insufficient for a large family. The family even started a small business making and selling homemade baked goods. But it quickly failed. The situation became so dire that, in her upper school years, Diana had to drop out of school to start working and help her mother. The 16-year-old girl took a job as a caregiver, looking after an elderly ill person. Since she wanted to become a doctor in the future, Garnica thought this experience would be beneficial. Despite her young age, she approached her job with full seriousness and responsibility. She precisely followed all instructions, monitored the medication schedule, performed necessary hygiene procedures, and cooked diet-specific meals, adhering to recommendations developed by the treating doctor. Diana liked her job. She felt needed and useful, strived to do everything right, and was highly valued for it. She worked nearly every day from morning to evening, but still faithfully attended church on Sundays with her mother and sisters. She also entered into a romantic relationship with a boy they had previously gone to school with. Sometimes, in the evenings, the young couple walked in the park, simply talking and enjoying each other's company. Nevertheless, Diana adhered to the strict rules and schedules set by her mother. She always returned home by 10 o'clock in the evening, did not stay out at night, and never went anywhere without informing her family where and with whom she would be and when she would return. Sometimes, she went to the city market with the neighbors and their children to buy necessities. But her mother always knew about such trips. Dario treated the neighbor's girl like his own daughter, took care of her, and even occasionally spoiled her with small gifts. When the man learned that she had a boyfriend, he paternalistically gave her advice about how boys could be deceitful and warned her not to let him deceive her or take advantage of her naivety and innocence. The girl shared this conversation with her mother, from whom she still had no secrets. Elizabeth found the neighbor's behavior somewhat strange, but she decided that it was his way of showing care, as he also had teenage daughters the same age as Diana. A strange request. On May 6, 2017, in the late afternoon, Diana unexpectedly received a call from her neighbor, who expressed a desire to help her family out of the goodness of his heart. At that time, Garnica was indeed in desperate need of money, but she was expecting a bonus soon, which she planned to spend on getting a dental prosthesis for her mom and starting repairs on their home's roof, which had started leaking after a recent rainstorm. However, Dario suddenly mentioned that he wanted to buy an air conditioner for Elizabeth as a gift and asked Diana to accompany him to help choose the right one. He insisted that Diana should not tell her mother about it, because he wanted it to be a surprise, which wouldn't be possible if she knew. He set up a meeting place and once again extracted a promise from her that she would tell no one. At the moment she received this odd call, Diana was just returning home from work. The neighbor urged her to go with him right away, but she said she needed to drop off groceries she'd bought on the way home and change her clothes. Upon arriving home, she naturally told her mother everything, as she never lied or kept secrets from her. The woman found it odd, too. Although they were on good terms with the neighbors, they had never done anything like this before. Elizabeth wanted to call Dario herself to thank him and decline the gift, as an air conditioner was not a necessity for their family. However, her daughter convinced her not to do so, saying she would go to the store as promised but would decline the expensive purchase. The girl reassured her mother that everything would be fine and that she would return home not too late. At that moment, the neighbor sent a text message to Diana's phone, stating he was already waiting for her, and again requested that she tell no one about their meeting to keep the surprise. Diana replied that she was on her way out, but then noticed that her phone was almost dead. She decided to leave it at home to charge. She met Dario at the agreed place, and that was the last time anyone saw her. A mysterious disappearance. When her daughter hadn't returned home by the evening, Elizabeth grew worried, especially since she couldn't call her because the phone was left at home. The woman waited a little longer, but as it grew dark, she started to panic. She first called her eldest daughter, Sonia, and told her everything, but she tried to reassure her mother, assuring her that her sister would return home soon and that nothing bad could have happened. As it got completely dark, the mother heard the sound of the neighbor's motorcycle, which pulled up to the house across the street. She thought Dario and her daughter had returned, so she breathed a sigh of relief. However, 5, 10, 20 minutes passed, and the girl still hadn't entered the house. Then the woman went outside and saw that the neighbor was alone. She approached him and asked about Diana, but he seemed surprised and said he didn't know anything about her and hadn't seen her that day. Elizabeth was stunned. She didn't know what to think and couldn't understand whether the neighbor was lying or if her daughter had deceived her for the first time in her life and gone somewhere else. However, the man insisted on his story and even handed her his phone to confirm he hadn't contacted her daughter. Naturally, by that time, he had already deleted all calls and messages. Dario also expressed concern about the girl's whereabouts and even offered to drive around the neighborhood with her mother to look for her and ask neighbors and the teenagers' friends if they had seen anything suspicious. However, the woman declined his help, deciding to start the search herself with her older children. They walked around the neighborhood until late at night, questioning everyone they met along the way and calling all of the girl's friends and acquaintances, but no one had seen her that day. Returning home, Elizabeth decided to check her daughter's phone and saw 2 missed calls and a message from the neighbor, as her daughter had not deleted them. Fully convinced that Dario was lying, the woman decided to go to the police and also called her ex-husband to inform him that their youngest daughter had vanished without a trace. The man lived several hundred miles from his ex-wife's home, but upon hearing the alarming news, he immediately drove to her to help search for their daughter. Police indifference and the horrific scene at the brick factory. When a worried woman arrived at the police station in the middle of the night with a report of her daughter's disappearance, the officers did not take the matter seriously. They assumed that the girl had probably run off with her boyfriend or gone to a party with friends and would return home by morning. Elizabeth shared her suspicions about the neighbor and even showed the calls and messages on her daughter's phone. But the officers dismissed her concerns, saying they would not start a search until at least 24 hours had passed. Realizing they could only rely on themselves, the Garnica family organized a massive search effort. By that time, the father had already arrived from another city, and together they went to the neighbor's house to have a serious talk. However, the house was empty, dark, and quiet, and no one responded to their knocks. The family then went to the brick factory where the neighbor worked with his relatives. And there, the relatives of the missing girl made a dreadful discovery. Since Dario was the senior member of his crew, he had keys to the factory and could access it even when it was closed. That night, the lights were on, and when the girl's relatives entered, they encountered a horrifying scene. The brick-making furnaces were on, though it was a day off and the factory was supposed to be closed. Moreover, all the adult members of the neighbor's family were present. They appeared agitated and were clearly in the process of burning something in the furnaces. The Garnicas were struck by a terrible suspicion. Dario was not in the factory, and when they asked his relatives where he was and what was happening, those present tried to deflect, saying they were preparing equipment for operation and conducting maintenance, and mentioned that the man had just been there and might have stepped out to the restroom. However, within the few minutes that this conversation lasted, the suspect managed to leave the factory through the back door, secretly escaping. Search for evidence and arrest of suspects. After the frightening scene at the factory and the strange behavior of Dario's relatives, the missing girl's family decided to contact the prosecutor's office. By that time, almost 24 hours had passed since the teenager's disappearance, and the investigation was supposed to begin. However, it turned out that no information from the police station where the parents had reported the girl's disappearance had reached them. This situation outraged and angered prosecutor Claudio Banari, who took the case under his personal control and promised to punish the police officers who had neglected their duties. His first action was to request a warrant to search Dario's home and the brick factory. However, since it was Sunday and the judicial system was unavailable, the prosecutor, not wanting to waste precious time, decided to organize everything under his own responsibility. Banari suspected that the suspect might have attacked the teenager, assaulted her, and then ended her life, asking his relatives for help to dispose of the body and evidence. He found it suspicious that Dario's entire family was in the factory on their day off, in the middle of the night, and had inexplicably started the furnaces. The calls and messages from the man to his young neighbor's phone also appeared suspicious. As the family searched for the girl, including through social media, the case quickly received wide publicity, leading to various speculations and guesses. For instance, a theory widely circulated that the young beauty could have been kidnapped to be sold into slavery in a brothel or for organs. One woman even accused a specific person, although it later turned out she was just trying to settle scores with an ex-boyfriend and send him to prison. The search of the suspect's house yielded no results. Obviously, he had not brought the girl there, and the crime had occurred elsewhere. No traces were found at the brick factory either, but Banari did not rule out that the furnaces could have been used as a crematorium to destroy the body and evidence. However, these were only guesses and hypotheses. Nevertheless, the prosecutor initiated the arrest of Dario, using the data from the missing girl's phone as a key argument. His brothers Caesar and Marcus, his wife, sister, mother-in-law, and some other relatives were also arrested as possible accomplices. During interrogation, the suspect denied all charges against him, claiming he had not seen the neighbor and had not communicated with her that day. However, based on data analysis from his phone, as well as gadgets belonging to his relatives and the victim, clear discrepancies in their statements were identified. The man was charged with unlawful detainment, possible assault, and depriving the girl of her life, while his relatives were accused of criminal conspiracy and complicity. All suspects were sent to jail for 3 months during the investigation. The search for Diana, despite the police's initial disbelief that the missing girl would be found alive. Her parents continued to hope for the best. They involved an increasing number of people in the search, organized marches and rallies, engaged the media in the investigation, and demanded that Dario confess where their daughter was and what he had done to her. In desperation, the parents sought audiences with the then ministers of security and justice to influence the investigation and pressure the suspect into making a statement. Although the missing girl's relatives were received by the highest state structures, unfortunately, this did not reflect in practice. Over 200 police officers were involved in the search, as well as service dogs and special equipment including helicopters and search drones, but there were still no results. Alarming discoveries at a brick factory in one of the kills during a second inspection. A strange, severely melted metal object was found, along with a tooth fragment. It was suspected that this object was the piercing the missing girl wore in her nose. However, special forensic analysis was required to confirm this, and it would take time. While law enforcement awaited the results, another more thorough search was conducted at Dario's house, where notebooks belonging to the man were found containing quite suspicious notes. These appeared to be sort of personal diaries, from which it was revealed that the man was literally obsessed with his young neighbor. Everything started when the family moved in next door to his house. At that time, she was only 13 years old. The suspect did not write anything specific about what he wanted to do with the girl, but the notes made it clear that she drove him mad. He thought about her every day for years, and periodically wrote letters addressed to the neighbor, in which he confessed his love in a peculiar form. After studying all the notes, investigators concluded that the man's obsession only grew over time, and he could no longer control his vile desires. In one of the last letters, he addressed the girl with words implying that she would eventually belong to him, and he would grant her eternal peace and tranquility. This entry looked like a direct threat, indicating that Dario might indeed have taken advantage of her and then dealt with her. The disappearance of physical evidence. It seemed that based solely on the entries from the diaries, the case could be brought to court, but the results of the forensic analysis were still pending. When Benari tried to find out the reason for the delay, it turned out that the evidence had simply disappeared. It was impossible to conduct a DNA analysis of the tooth fragment to determine if it belonged to the missing girl, or to establish what the strange metal object was. Subsequently, the prosecutor decided to classify information about the investigation's progress, and the police officers responsible for preserving the evidence were immediately fired, and also detained for criminal negligence and possible assistance to the suspects. The investigation itself, after this egregious incident, came under the direct control of federal authorities. Moreover, it soon emerged that part of the records found in the suspect's home had also disappeared. Among these was the last letter in which he promised to grant the girl eternal rest. Without these pieces of evidence, the case could simply fall apart, and the criminal and his accomplices might escape punishment. However, no measures helped determine where the physical evidence had vanished to. 3 months later, the detention period for the suspects expired, but bringing the case to court without key evidence was risky, and evidently threatened a loss. What remained were data from the girl's phone, and testimony from a random witness who saw the suspect and the missing girl walking together on the street on the day she disappeared. Dario's lawyer demanded that the entire investigation be declared invalid and his client be immediately released, as well as the search results annulled, since they were conducted without a special warrant. The court only partially granted the defense's request. The main suspect remained in custody, but all his relatives were released, as nothing specific could be charged against them. However, in May 2019, 2 years after the girl's disappearance, Dario was also released. Over that time, the investigation had not progressed, no new evidence had emerged, and the body had not been found. The long-awaited trial and verdict. Although the main suspect was set free, the case was not closed, and the investigation continued. Occasionally, evidence and testimonies emerged suggesting Diana might still be alive. For instance, a banknote was found with a plea for help allegedly written by the girl. However, handwriting analysis established that the writing did not belong to the missing girl. Only in June 2021, more than 4 years after the girl's disappearance, Prosecutor Benari finally managed to bring this challenging case to court. But the process was constantly delayed due to the global pandemic raging worldwide, and the Garnica family felt increasingly disheartened. The relatives no longer hoped for a favorable outcome, or that the guilty would face deserved punishment. The trial only began in April 2023, 6 years after the crime was committed, with the culprit finally appearing in court. By that time, the missing entries from Dario's diaries, which everyone believed were lost forever, had been found. These became the key pieces of evidence proving the man's guilt. However, additional expert analysis was required to verify the authenticity of these documents. In addition to this, 2 new witnesses appeared in the case. One was Dario's former lover, who claimed he had seduced her when she was still a teenager. She also asserted that the suspect always had a weakness for young girls, and she was far from the only one he had treated this way. The second witness was a neighbor of Caesar, Dario's brother and probable accomplice. According to him, on the night of the girl's disappearance, the brothers arrived together on a motorcycle with a strange large bundle in the sidecar, took some tools from a shed, and then left together. The witness had remained silent for so long because he feared Caesar could harm his family, as he was always volatile and aggressive. The defendant never admitted his guilt, claiming he would never harm the neighboring girl, to whom he felt as though she were his daughter. Nonetheless, the few pieces of evidence were sufficient to render a guilty verdict. The body of the missing girl was never found, and the events of that fateful day were painstakingly reconstructed, establishing that the man lured, took advantage of the teenager, and then ended her life and disposed of the remains, likely with the help of his relatives. On May 2, 2023, Dario was found guilty of the abduction. taking advantage of and ending the life of Diana. He was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. His brother Caesar, as well as any other relatives, could not be held accountable. Story 5. The Price of Love. What determines our future? Definitely the decisions we make and the actions we take. However, sometimes chance intervenes in the usual way of life, and then they say that you can't escape fate. Also happened to the heroes of today's story, Joseph and Olga Connell, whose life paths crossed in an unexpected way, after which the couple never parted. Unfortunately, the lovers could not enjoy each other to the fullest, as they were destined for a terrible fate. Around 2 a.m. on September 23, 2013, a series of gunshots rang out near the Paladin Club condominium in Wilmington, Delaware. When eyewitnesses ran to the scene, they saw a man and a woman lying on the ground. A little later, a call went out to emergency services. The caller reported the attack and its victims. Medics arrived and administered first aid. Despite the gunshot wounds to the face and loss of blood, the victim was alive, which could not be said about her companion. The bullet-riddled man showed no signs of life. Apparently, he was killed instantly, shot in the back of the head. Unfortunately, time was running against him. Realizing this, police officers questioned the woman about what had happened. In response, she uttered something inaudible and lost consciousness. The victim was rushed to the hospital. However, halfway there, she gave up her last attempts to fight for life and died. Working at the scene, specialists found personal belongings and documents. Connell's newlyweds turned out to be the deceased. All valuables, wallet, purse, cell phones, and even the diamond ring on Olga's hand, were not stolen, which means that the attack was not an attempted robbery, but a targeted murder. It was later determined that the victims were attacked outside their home. After the young men returned home from celebrating their spouse's 39th birthday, the attackers acted in a treacherous manner and fired approximately 25 shots into their backs. Detectives had to figure out what interrupted the couple's love affair, and whether the motive for the crime could have been a long-running domestic dispute. Connell family Joseph was born into a successful and close-knit family. He was the middle child and had an older brother, John, and a younger sister, Kelly. During the younger years, the children often quarreled over nothing. But when their parents divorced, they rallied and became inseparable. After the breakup of relations, the guys stayed to live with their mother. After a while, another man appeared in the life of a woman. The new marriage turned out to be successful in all plans. The family still did not need anything, and the stepfather replaced the father. The family lived in a fairly quiet and cozy neighborhood. During the day, everyone went about their business. And in the evenings, everyone gathered around the round table and discussed personal events. Joe grew up a correct and persistent boy. However, these qualities were more about school and work. Otherwise, he was a fun-loving boy and the soul of the company. Even from an early age, the young man dreamed of starting his own business and to establish himself as a businessman. Thanks to his business acumen and resourcefulness, his efforts bore fruit. Together with his best friend, Christopher Rivers, the hero of the story became the owner of a machine store and a specialized store in Tullyville. Everyone in the neighborhood knew the young men as successful partners who had risen from scratch. The buddies were very friendly, moreover, burned a common idea and developed their business. The story of acquaintance Joseph was a convinced bachelor until he met a Russian beauty Olga. Communication between the young people began on the dating site. They quickly found common topics for conversation as they were already quite mature people with a lot of life experience. A female friend admitted online that she was in the process of divorce and had only recently moved to the United States. The man told about his experienced relationships and plans for the future. Both interlocutors were sociable and bright personalities, had similar interests and views on life. Therefore, it is not surprising that gradually their feelings grew into something more. One day Joe realized that he no longer imagines his life without his beloved and made her an offer. Olga reciprocated. The only nuance was the fact that the bride has not yet been presented to the family. However, the man did not fear for this. He was confident in his choice and in the reaction of relatives. The beauty and character of the chosen one charmed his relatives. They were in shock that there was a woman who managed to melt the heart of a hot, loving relative. Relationships of the couple developed rapidly. Joe took Olga everywhere with him, proud of her appearance and charisma. Therefore, without shyness, did not hide his love. However, over time it became clear that behind the female malleability and tenderness hides a real Siberian temperament where the beloved was born. Her irrepressible energy and entrepreneurial spirit amazed everyone. She seemed to be able to do anything. Connell was so delighted and in love that he decided not to postpone the wedding in a long time. Perhaps he was in such a hurry to get married, unwittingly anticipating the coming events. Such people are usually said in a hurry to live. Surely each of you have encountered such examples in your environment. Investigation. After the attack, the police interviewed the crowd, bystanders and neighbors of the victims. Perhaps among them were those who could clarify something. Unfortunately, none of them had seen what had happened. However, many people heard gunshots which caused them to run away. There were even those who claimed to have heard loud male voices shortly before the shooting. They seemed to be arguing with the newlyweds about something. Violent crime ensued. Not far from the scene of the crime, forensic experts found a large number of fired casings that belonged to two different types of weapons. Thus, it became clear that there were several attackers. The sheer number of gunshots indicated that the couple was initially given a death sentence. It is unlikely that anyone would have managed to stay alive in such a shootout. To carry out their plan, the criminals waited for the young people to return from the party. The birthday party took place in one of the popular bars. Friends and some members of the party. Everyone had fun and danced until midnight, and when they were tired, they went home. The couple parked their car at the house and headed toward the front entrance. It was at this point that the intruders found the most opportune time to carry out their criminal scheme. The next step in the investigation was to interview the family members of the victims. Officers spoke to Joseph's parents. They asked about the couple's alleged enemies and detractors. But the man's mother and stepfather replied that they knew nothing about it. At first glance, the newlyweds had no foes. On the other hand, there is hardly anyone who does not have envious people. In any case, none of the newly wedded spouses told it. At the same time, the detectives heard some curious information. It turns out that Joe and his sister Kelly had a spat on the eve of the wedding. It concerned an expensive family ring encrusted with diamonds. According to experts, its value was about $20,000. After the quarrel, relations between the relatives were not the same. However, all relatives claimed that Kelly would never have gone to the crime. Especially, it turned out that after the attack, the ring remained on Olga's finger. Nevertheless, the version about the hidden offense had to be checked. By a strange coincidence, on the unfortunate night Kelly was one of the first on the scene of the crime. Despite the fact that the woman lived in another neighborhood, that time she was nearby. The ring story. The lovers planned to get married in the Virgin Islands. The only thing that marred the wedding preparations was the engagement ring. According to family tradition, the mother passed the family jewel to her son. However, the jewelry had already been given to the youngest daughter for the wedding, which took place 10 years ago. In order not to change the established custom, Joe discreetly took the ring from his sister and replaced the precious stones with zirconium. After that, he secretly returned the ring to the mistress and diamonds inserted into the setting of Olga's engagement jewelry. The deed of the protagonist is difficult to explain, especially given his financial situation. Perhaps in this way he decided not to violate the established rules. It was assumed that none of the women should not have guessed it. However, things had not gone as calculated. Kelly noticed the switch and began looking for the culprit. When the younger sister learned of her brother's action, she was extremely outraged. Understandably, she expressed her indignation to Joseph. However, the latter was very upset, as he thought that the sister was angry for nothing and just wanted to violate family traditions and ruin the wedding. One way or another, but the ceremony took place. Kelly did not attend the event, citing employment. At the same time, in retaliation, The woman decided to mar the celebration and sent a sarcastic message to Olga. So the unsuspecting bride learned the truth. After that, the relationship between brother and sister became strained. Periodically between them there were altercations, often sounded mutual reproaches and insults, and the event that occurred afterward and completely knocked everyone out of the rut, a mysterious robbery. Joint life at the newlyweds began there in the Virgin Islands. During the honeymoon, the couple enjoyed marriage. Olga and Joseph sunbathed on the beach, swam in the sea, fished, rode on a yacht, and tried exotic cuisine. There was plenty of money for these purposes. Joe was proud that the business was booming and bringing in a tangible income, about $1 million a year. Back home, the newlyweds bought an expensive Mercedes car. The new convertible cost them $100,000. Since Olga did not belong to those women who are happy to sit on the neck of her husband, she began to help her husband. Olga was well educated and well read, well versed in English, and also had an unprecedented charm. In addition, the past experience of working on the stock exchange came in handy. Therefore, she easily entered the business and engaged in administration. As soon as the lovely blonde took up the business, Joe and Chris had a lot more clients. A week before the attack near the condominium, someone broke into the home of a young family. While the couple were busy doing business, an unknown person stole jewelry and family heirlooms. The diamond ring was Olga's that day. After the Connell couple returned home, the head of the family noticed the illegal intrusion and called the police. Law enforcement officers examined the scene and surprisingly did not find any evidence. The search for the burglar yielded no solid results. Detectives put forward a version that the robbery was the result of someone staging or the work of a professional. That's why Kelly was under a lot of suspicion. As many believed, the sister had every reason to stage the crime. Perhaps over time, she could not forgive her brother for what he had done and decided to teach him a lesson. However, soon the investigation of the case came to a dead end. A more terrible crime happened to the spouses and all the attention of detectives shifted to the investigation of a double crime. Search for motive. When detectives interviewed Kelly, she looked grief-stricken. The woman cooperated with the investigation and didn't hide anything. She told about the conflict with Joe and even showed correspondence about it. In one of the messages, Olga expressed the opinion that the recent robbery was organized by Kelly herself. However, Kelly denied it. But the investigation could not exclude her from the number of suspects and, as the woman later admitted, exerted powerful pressure in some places. Despite the obvious motive, all the facts were to the contrary. At none of the interrogations did the victim's younger sister change her testimony, nor was she confused. During Joe and Olga's funeral, the sister looked broken. It was obvious that she loved her brother and was grieving the loss. At the same time, other versions of the murder were being considered. Joseph Connell belonged to the number of enviable grooms and his wife was a rare beauty. Therefore, jealousy was not ruled out as a motive for the crime. Perhaps not everyone around the couple shared their happiness and some of the former young people could hold a grudge and, after their marriage, to take revenge in life. However, the suspicions of detectives were not confirmed. During the investigation, it was found that Joe parted with his former companions on a good note. Moreover, they have long married and are happily married. This applies to Olga's past relationships as well. She divorced her Russian husband and cut off all contacts. However, an offended man would hardly take any measures to settle accounts with his ex-wife, and even more so to travel a great distance across the ocean to do so. In this regard, this theory has been ruled out. Nevertheless, the search for enemies of newlyweds continued. At the same time, the investigators did not give rest to the subject of discord between brother and sister. Greed is a common reason for committing a crime. Therefore, after questioning Kelly, the investigation focused on Garrett Catalano, her husband. The man loved his wife very much and would do anything for her. It is likely that at the request of his beloved, he could have gone for a double crime. During the conversation, the potential suspect behaved calmly and convincingly. It turns out that he had a reliable alibi and also confirmed the innocence of his wife. However, Garrett expressed doubts that his brother-in-law made a multimillion-dollar fortune by honest labor. Catalano opaquely hinted that Joe may have been dealing in illegal substances. Over time, his words took hold. There were others who claimed that Joe was secretly selling steroids and making mad money from it. Secret witnesses identified another man we know as one of his associates. Thus, the detectives came upon a longtime friend and business partner, Christopher Rivers' best friend. Chris, unlike everyone around him, didn't seem to be worried about what had happened. He continued to lead his usual life. It was understandable that he had the double responsibility for the business. Meetings with suppliers, work with clients made him hold on. But still, his irrepressible vigor and strength of mind led to strange thoughts. One day, the investigators decided to talk to the man. He said that on the ill-fated night, he was supposed to be present at the celebration, but could not show up because he was busy at work. Despite a long friendship and the premature death of his partner, Christopher unexpectedly spoke out unflatteringly. He said that Joseph had changed recently and was apparently unscrupulous. Rivers did not avoid Olga. Allegedly, he heard that the wife of Joe was not as simple as she wanted to seem and came to the U.S. to represent the interests of the Russian mafia. And a successful marriage only untied her hands. The words of the companion explained the high income of the family, but his suspicions needed careful verification. Perhaps everything the man said was just rumor and speculation, or maybe there was a good reason for it. However, Joseph's connection to the underworld soon became apparent. The information was not a secret and was publicly available. It turns out that a few years before meeting with Olga, her lover was accused of illegal possession of weapons and even served a decent term for it. During his time in prison, the man managed to acquire new acquaintances. It is not excluded that after serving his sentence, local authorities pulled him into the trade in illegal substances. Perhaps over time, Connell crossed someone's path and they decided to take him out. But could the connections acquired behind bars have been the motive for the attack? The investigation was gathering momentum. While the detectives were working on the shady business, an interesting point came to light. Harry Cook, a well-known drug dealer, said he had heard Rivers make negative remarks about Joe on more than one occasion. Rivers accused his business partner of stealing. Chris Rivers admitted to him that he and his companion were selling illegal medical drugs through an auto parts store. But the buddy is greedy and distributes the profits unequally, while Chris is in greater need of money and has huge debts. And Joseph himself spends all the finances on an idle life. For this reason, Rivers joked that he wouldn't mind if his friend disappeared, and later seriously asked Harry if he wanted to help him in this, to which the latter replied no. Thus, the identity of Rivers appeared in a different light. In this regard, the investigation repeatedly questioned Chris. However, he had an alibi. At the time of the murder, the man was at home, which was confirmed by external and internal video surveillance cameras. At the same time, specialists decided to check his censures and studied the accounting documents of the firm. It turned out that despite the large revenue, the business did suffer losses. However, as it turned out, numerous embezzlements have nothing to do with Connell. It was the stipulator himself who was responsible. Police informants reported that Chris has been using heavy substances for a long time, and lately his addiction has gotten out of control. This explains the numerous debts and shoplifting. Against this background, the man developed paranoia. That's why he repeatedly confessed to acquaintances that they want to kill him. In addition, it became known that he was personally involved in the sale of steroids. And Joe blindly believed his comrade and was in the dark about what was happening in front of his nose. In addition, Joe's attention turned to the new relationship. This information became known thanks to the information of a mysterious informant. A sick mind. Detectives came upon the man after examining Rivers' phone records. He was known to make a lot of phone calls on the night of September 23rd. Despite being at home at the time of the crime, his phone did not go silent. All calls were subsequently cleared from the device, but experts had no trouble reconstructing the story. Most of the calls belonged to Joshua, a former FBI informant. When police contacted Joshua, he admitted that he often used Rivers' services. One day, Chris Rivers made him a tempting offer, $65,000 for his companion's head. The big money undoubtedly attracted the man. However, Joshua did not want to participate in the case directly and found other hitmen. To this end, he turned to Dominic Benson and Aaron Thompson. Mercenaries cost him $5,000, which he received from the customer as an advance payment. Eventually, the confusing crime picture came to light. The best friend had sentenced his buddy and his spouse to a sad end. Was the motive behind the crime a grudge and a desire for sole ownership of a shared business? No, it was the $1 million that one of the partners was entitled to as an insurance payout. It turned out that long before the appearance of Olga, the former partners had secured the business and insured their lives. In the event of the death of one of them, the other received the amount to pay off the mortgage on the machine shop. If Joe died, the amount received would be enough to pay off all of Chris's debts. But here's the problem. His partner got married, and all payments were due to the legal spouse. So Rivers decided to take out two of them at once. The conversation that took place between the organizer and his accomplice on the night of the crime indirectly confirmed this. Although the communications between the men were encrypted, it was obvious that Rivers was concerned about the success of the operation. To better analyze the communication between the two men, detectives seized phones from the four suspects. Thanks to the mobile devices, their movements on the night of the crime were recorded. Dominic and Aaron were at that moment near the house of the young couple, Connell. Curiously, the video footage that confirmed Chris's alibi played against him. The cameras show that the man is nervous and does not let the phone out of his hands. After detectives reached out to Joshua, he didn't put up a fight and surrendered to authorities. To mitigate his punishment during the interrogation, the man agreed to a deal with the investigation and testified against the customer. Thus, Christopher came up with a cunning plan. He wanted to use the quarrel between his brother and sister to frame Kelly. During the investigation, it was proved that the robbery at the Connell house was the next stage of the criminal plot. Following Christopher's instructions, Joshua broke into the couple's home and burglarized it. However, the head of was a controversial family heirloom, a diamond ring. Coincidentally, Olga was wearing it that day. If the plan had succeeded, the investigation would have followed a false trail and blamed everything on Joe's sister. But this was not enough for Rivers, and after the crime, he tried to blacken the name of his friend. As it turned out later, the death of Joe and his lover was the result of a cold-blooded and carefully planned crime for money, justice. In 2014, Chris Rivers was indicted on several charges. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, as well as conspiracy in the first degree and solicitation of a felony in the first degree. His co-defendants were also tried. The trials took place separately but parallel to each other. During the trial, it was proven that Aaron Thompson was the one who held the weapon. He was therefore found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder, 2 counts of possession of a firearm during the commission of a felony, and first-degree conspiracy. The felon received 2 life sentences and plus 45 years. His buddy Dominic Benson was acquitted on the felony charge because he changed his mind about shooting at the last minute. Therefore, for first-degree conspiracy and aiding and abetting criminals, he received only 5 years in prison. Thanks to his active cooperation with the police for the murder conspiracy, Joshua got the same sentence. As for the main instigator of the crime, Chris Rivers, he was found guilty on all charges and sentenced to 2 life sentences plus 50 years. "We can forgive another person anything but success," goes the famous saying. Despite his young age, Joseph was a remarkable man. He built a business, found the love of his life, except that he was not left with the opportunity to enjoy happiness. Together, the couple could reach new heights, build a strong family, and have heirs. However, the thirst for profit and the dislike of his partner made irreparable adjustments to their measured life. Money, one of the old and common motives for crime. Christopher's pernicious addiction and greed ruined several lives. During his years in prison, the convict will surely be cured of his pernicious addiction to substances. But will he be able to stifle the guilt that is supposed to come with time? Unknown. Or maybe in his case, the voice of conscience will never be heard. After all, not everyone dares to spend Not a good morning. A woman's corpse was found 5 miles outside of Wayland, Massachusetts, in the early morning hours of July 4, 2011. The find was discovered by a woman riding a bicycle whose path took her near a swampy area. While riding, she was admiring the scenery. Suddenly, her attention was drawn to something fanciful and out of place. When curiosity got the better of her, the woman came closer and was horrified. Not far from the road, a dead girl lay among the grass and mud. To all appearances, the poor girl had not drowned but had encountered unprecedented cruelty. A wound was visible on her neck and a bungee cord was tangled in her hair. Coping with her excitement, the bystander dialed emergency services and reported what she had seen. Suddenly, her plans for the day changed. She put aside her business and waited for the police. Upon arriving on the scene, law enforcement officers pulled the body onto dry land and examined it, after which it was immediately sent for forensic examination. The girl had been in the water for a short time, so her appearance had not undergone significant changes. Officers recognized 18-year-old Lauren Astley, universally wanted since the previous evening. Lauren had been reported missing the previous day after she failed to return home or turn up for a meeting with friends. CCTV cameras recorded her entering the shopping center where she worked as a sales clerk at around 10 a.m. on July 3rd and leaving the building at 6:45 p.m. after finishing her shift. It was established that Astley was on the phone with someone at this time. Unfortunately, that was the last time she was seen alive. She was never heard from after that. Malcolm, the heroine's father, began to worry. After all, his daughter was characterized by punctuality and was true to her word. Therefore, if she had said she would be home by the appointed time, she would do so. She would not change her route for no apparent reason. At most, she would have reported that she was running late. Mr. Astley therefore realized that something bad had happened and, without wasting time, reported the disappearance to the police. The police officers did not wait for the allotted time and started the search immediately. In parallel, the girl's family and friends joined in. By the way, word of mouth worked quickly, and the news that she was missing instantly spread among acquaintances. Soon in the parking lot of the local beach was found a red Jeep, the car of the missing. The car stood with the windows down, and her personal belongings, a purse and a laptop, lay inside the car. However, the girl herself was not in it. It was also unclear where she could have gone after leaving the vehicle so precariously. When Malcolm was informed of the discovery of the car, he immediately drove to the spot. There he tried to figure out where his daughter had gone. He walked along the shore and shone a flashlight into the water, looking for her as if she had drowned. Lauren's friends arrived after him. They decided to spend the night at the site, hoping to be the first to spot her. All night they scoured the area and wondered where Lauren had disappeared to. The young men didn't know what to think or where to look for her. However, none of them could imagine that something irreparable had happened to Lauren. It seemed like something that only happened in the movies. The person you had been talking and laughing with not so long ago couldn't just disappear like that. Not 12 hours later, Lauren's body was found. The first person the officers called was her father. They informed about the terrible discovery and asked to come to the identification. Malcolm's eyes to the last refused to believe that the girl lying on the pathologist's table, his daughter. However, coming to his senses, the man officially recognized his child. In front of him lay his girl, young and bright, who recently had her whole life ahead of her. Unbearable pain pierced the man's heart. Nevertheless, nothing could be brought back or undone. At this point, he had to do two important things: to report the terrible news to his former spouse and find the culprit in the death of his daughter. When the sad news spread throughout the city, no one could not believe what had happened. Family and close acquaintances in one voice said that Lauren had no enemies or ill-wishers. The only one on whom suspicion involuntarily fell was her ex-boyfriend, Nathaniel Fujita. His name was spoken with great hesitation, as everyone knew how much he loved Lauren and would never hurt her. However, the deformations that happen to a person who has gone through a breakup are different, and who knows what someone who is unable to let go of the past is capable of. First love. First love is a very strong feeling. Coming into a person's life, it changes it completely, ruins the usual way of life. Such emotions nourish and inspire, dilute reality with new colors. Together with it comes the first kiss, the first intimate experience, the first departure from the parental home, the first job, and so on. This is a very vivid segment of life, when some sensations are superimposed on others. But often such love is fleeting. Someone breaks up because they are separated by circumstances. Someone could not cope with the resulting contradictions, and someone simply realized that they do not fit each other. After that, there remains a certain incompleteness and understatement, which excites until the end of days. One way or another, but most of us go through it. However, not everyone has the fortitude to get over it and move on, to thank the person for the time spent and say goodbye to them. This story is about the flip side of love, the heavy addiction and jealousy that ruined young hearts. Lauren Astley and Nathaniel Fujita are the envy of the entire high school. She is a petite, pretty brown girl who stands out from everyone with her activity and uniqueness. He is a tall, ambitious soccer player, the object of adoration of many girls. Despite the fact that young people were acquainted from an early age, they revealed themselves to each other later. Their relationship began in high school and lasted 3 years. It was a very colorful romance with all the consequences. They fought and made up. They would break up and get back together. Both had a difficult character, but the lovers tried to cherish the fragile feeling that arose between them. This continued, at least for the first few years of their relationship. Lauren Dunn Astley was born in 1993 in Boston. She was the only child in the family of Mary and Malcolm. From this, their attention was completely focused on the little girl. Since both parents worked as teachers, important values were instilled in her from an early age. Their most important wish was for their daughter to grow up to be a good person. When Lauren was 6 years old, the couple Astley divorced. However, this did not affect the upbringing of the girl. Each of them still continued to care about her and support Lauren in all endeavors, and they have a young beauty was a lot. She was constantly fascinated by something, and her whole day was scheduled by the minute. Her versatile interests were amazing. Lauren was fond of tennis and soccer, sang in a musical group, and was a member of the Youth Symphony Orchestra. She was also a member of her church choir, a counselor at a children's camp, and had a starring role in a theater production of Annie at the local arts center. No school or town concert was without her participation. Many were amazed by her irrepressible energy. She was active and omnipresent. The second direction of the girl's hobbies was social activity. Astley participated in many charitable actions. At the age of 12, she helped victims of Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, Louisiana. Afterward, she visited the area 2 more times on a similar mission. She had a big and kind heart, open to the world and people. Therefore, she cared for others more than she cared for herself. Everyone around her knew that she could be called upon at any time for help or advice. Nathaniel Fujita went to high school with Lauren. He was an outstanding player on the school soccer team and showed great promise. By the way, he also dreamed of connecting his future life with sports. He was known as a diligent student and the soul of the company. The young man was the eldest son of Beta and Tom Fujita. It can be said that his family was prosperous and quite famous in certain circles. His father was a famous guitarist and professor at Berklee College of Music in Boston. He was different from many and was an unconventional person. Perhaps the romantic relationship between Lauren and Nate just on this ground. One day, the girl interviewed the boyfriend's father for a school assignment. After that, she began to appear in their house more often, and when young people stopped hiding their feelings, their parents began to communicate and go to visit each other. As I said earlier, the first 2 years of the relationship between the lovers were perfect. They were very attractive young people, and their couple was eye-catching. Nate and Lori did everything together, going out, playing sports, studying, and participating in activities. However, later on, from such a close connection became stuffy. The guy did not let the girl go anywhere alone and controlled everywhere. He was jealous of her to every pillar, and often he saw things that were not. Nathaniel wanted to get all her attention and not share it with anyone. This was the reason for the conflicts between them. They became more frequent as the young man began to react more aggressively. But at the same time, No one heard Lauren complain about any physical impact. In general, their relationship became like an emotional seesaw. The state of calm was lost. It didn't suit both of them, but they couldn't go back to their previous easy feelings anymore. Lauren more than once thought about the future and closer to the end of her schooling decided on her future life. She outlined all the pros and cons of her relationship with Nate on a sheet of paper and clearly realized that it was time to say goodbye. She'd also always disliked the way he acted around her mom. Lauren had unwittingly projected their relationship onto her supposed life with him, and she didn't want that kind of behavior. On top of that, the impending enrollment played a big part. Their life paths were already diverging. Lauren was applying to Ohlone University in North Carolina, and her boyfriend was invited to Trinity College in Connecticut to play soccer there. Break up. Lauren announced the fateful decision on April 1, 2011 on her birthday. She considered it the best timing, as there was still time ahead to come to terms with new realities and start their lives with a clean slate. Everyone had new acquaintances and busyness ahead of them that would help push the sad thoughts away. Nathaniel, however, did not share Lauren's aspirations. He felt a deep sense of loss and loneliness. He was no longer excited about going to college. He stopped practicing and partying. All he did all day was lie on the couch and watch TV. The guy fell into a deep depression that he could no longer control. All around noted that from a formerly active and energetic young man, he turned into a withdrawn and depressed. In addition, Fujita became addicted to alcohol and pot. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from the harsh reality. It was hard for Lauren to see him like that, much less be the cause of it. The girl asked her friends for advice on what to do in such a case and how to help him. But everyone recommended her not to interfere and to give him time to get over this pain on his own. Otherwise, he could regard her participation as a chance that everything could be corrected and returned. Her friend's advice was sound. She shouldn't have shown her face to him, for at the sight of her, his condition worsened. Unfortunately, the girl had become his trigger. Looking a little ahead, in the aftermath, her kindness and desire to help turned against her. After graduation, Astley, along with her friends, organized a big party, which was attended by about 150 people. The event was held under a huge dome, where young people danced and had fun. Among the invitees also turned out and the ex-boyfriend of the heroine. At the party, Nathan came quite drunk. Seeing Lauren dancing in the middle of the dance floor, he approached her to talk. But she asked him not to bother her and not to ruin the party. There was no point in having idle conversations. Everything had been said several times before. And secondly, she did not want to communicate with him in such a state. However, the guy kept up with her and asked her to start all over again. With each passing minute, his mood worsened and his aggression manifested itself with greater force. At one point, he became so angry that he stepped aside and hit the pole holding the structure with all his might. In response, the structure staggered and collapsed. The celebration was hopelessly ruined. Everyone expressed displeasure and a desire for Nathan to leave the party. Later, Lauren came to her mother in tears and confessed to her that the former boyfriend does not leave her alone and follows her everywhere. The girl added that at the graduation event, he wouldn't let anyone dance with her and behaved disgustingly. He was angry that she was happy without him. Suspect. When the police learned Lauren was missing, the first thing they did was to question everyone she was close to. One way or another, all roads led to Fujita. Only he seemed to have a motive to harm her. However, his entire entourage assured her otherwise. However, officers in the course of their practice had more than once come across cases where crimes were committed by people who were not expected to do so. Nathaniel and his mother met the detectives on the doorstep. During the conversation, the boy looked confused. He seemed impressed by the sudden disappearance of his beloved. He admitted that he had seen her recently, around 7 o'clock in the evening. The girl stopped by him in her car, after which they had a nice conversation, and then she drove away. According to the guy, their conversation did not take more than 5 minutes. In addition, the young man added that at the time of Lauren's disappearance, he was at home and did not go anywhere. True, his alibi was difficult to confirm, since he was alone at the time. His mother agreed with her son's words. Mrs. Fujita admitted that she had also seen Nathan's ex-girlfriend that day. She visited her at the mall where the latter worked part-time. The woman was saddened by the changes that had occurred in her son. That's why she asked Lauren to talk to him. The fact is that the parents of the young man had already sought help from a psychiatrist, but his services were ineffective. Their son had lost all interest in life and just existed. Beta hoped Lauren's words would give him strength, or at least a sense of male pride in him so he could move on. The request had put a crimp in Lauren's plans, but the meeting wasn't supposed to take a long time, so no one knew about it. It turned out that the phone conversation recorded by the mall's security cameras had taken place between her and Nathan just after the meeting with his mother. The girl was still continuing to worry about her ex-boyfriend, so she dialed him and arranged to see him. At 7:05 p.m., Astley drove up to Fujita's house and sent a text message with the word "here." The information that Nathaniel and Beta provided was certainly valuable information for the police officers. However, it was not clear where Lauren had gone after that, and why her car was left open on the beach. The case became clearer in the morning, when the body of the poor girl was accidentally found in the swamp. Convinced that the corpse of the girl probably belongs to Lauren Astley, the detectives decided to visit Nathan again. This time, however, he was not at home. They didn't need his presence, though. The officers had a search warrant. Needed evidence to confirm the version of the investigation about the involvement of the former lover in the murder. The examination began with the garage. Experienced specialists immediately became clear that something bad had happened in it. Somewhere on the floor were found bloodstains, and on the wall in a prominent place hung several elastic cords. They matched those tangled in the murdered girl's hair. Traces of blood were also found in the house. The doorknob, kitchen floor, kitchen sink, and bathroom sink contained faint splatters. It was obvious that someone had tried to mop them up, but had done so sloppily and apparently in a hurry. A black gym bag was found in the basement. Inside it were wet and muddy tennis shoes. In Nathan's bedroom, in a kind of hiding place, detectives found a pair of bloody shoes, wet bloody clothes. The mud found on the shoes seemed to match the mud from the swamp where Lauren's body had been located. But the samples found had to be submitted to a lab for an official conclusion. Time later, experts confirmed the detectives' assumptions. They also determined that the blood found in Fujita's house belonged to the deceased. Undeniable evidence of Nathan's involvement in the ex-girlfriend's death had been obtained. However, his whereabouts were still unknown. Therefore, soon the guy was declared wanted. The investigation of the case progressed with inconceivable speed. A few hours later, the suspect was found. All this time, he was staying with a cousin in a neighboring town. Eventually, on the morning of July 5, 2011, Nathaniel was arrested on suspicion of murder. At the time of his arrest, he was aloof and quiet, and offered no resistance. At the same time, he did not cooperate with the investigation during interrogation. He didn't say anything about the crime he was charged with. The detectives had two thoughts about it. Either he could not find an excuse for his behavior, or he was afraid to say too much. So he didn't say a word. Investigators' version. The investigation believed that Lauren Astley visited the ex-boyfriend after meeting with his mother. The girl was worried about him, so she decided to talk to him and cheer him up a little. After that, the two of them proceeded to Fujita's garage. There, a quarrel may have taken place, after which Nathan attacked her and began to strangle her with a bungee cord. After killing the girl, he drove her red Jeep to the beach and threw the car keys into a storm drain. By the way, they were later found. The intruder then returned home, put his lover in his car and drove her to the swamp. Following this, he tried to hide the crime. Despite the fact that he had not previously been physically violent towards Lauren, it was obvious to everyone that her boyfriend was periodically unrestrained and capable of aggression. Thus, his motives were unwillingness to come to terms with the breakup and underlying resentment. During a preliminary hearing on August 23, 2011, Nathaniel was charged with first-degree felony assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. When the boyfriend was asked if he would plead guilty to the crimes charged, he barely audibly uttered no. So it became clear that his lawyers had engaged in foul play, having come up with a certain line of conduct and defense. As a result, The prosecutor filed a motion to keep the defendant in jail without the possibility of bail. The court granted the prosecutor's request. Trial. On February 13, 2013, Fujita appeared in court. Nathaniel's attorney, William Sullivan, pleaded the defendant's insanity. He did not deny that a murder had been committed, however. He stated the following. On the evening of July 3, 2011, due to severe clinical depression, the defendant had a psychopathic attack. At that time, the guy was unable to give an account of his actions, so he attacked the girl. Nathan's friends confirmed the words of the defender in terms of changes in his behavior. They told about the fact that he really changed and stopped appearing in the company. Everyone was struck by the fact that previously he was just sick of soccer and did not miss training even during illness. And after parting with Lauren overnight, he stopped being interested in something that was a huge part of his life. The psychiatrist that Fujita visited also spoke at the court hearing. It was he who diagnosed his patient and suggested medication and therapy. However, Nathaniel refused. At trial, it was suggested that the defendant's mental health problems may have stemmed not only from the painful breakup, but primarily because of the athlete's numerous repetitive head injuries, and the breakup exacerbated the situation and triggered a severe seizure. However, the prosecution was not in agreement with the arguments of the defense attorney. Prosecutor Lisa McGovern said that the defendant was aware of what was happening, acted in a planned and calculated manner, and the crime was committed out of base motives. It was found that the guy constantly stalked the girl and did not give her peace. Even that day, a few hours before the end of her working day, he appeared in the shopping center and watched her, which is confirmed by CCTV footage. And Lauren's situation at his mother's request was an opportunity for Nathan to put his criminal intent into action. Witness testimony corroborated the prosecution's case. Fujita was clearly unrepentant. One eyewitness reported seeing Nathan returning home on the unfortunate evening and music playing in his car. A cousin also gave denunciatory testimony against a relative. She said that on the evening of July 3rd, her brother called her and offered to hang out, but the girl was busy, so she refused. To what he got very angry and said that he wanted to distract himself. But apparently, it will not work. The next day, when the news of Lauren's death became known, his cousin contacted him again. She asked him if he knew, to which he replied that no one would ever know the truth about her death or where the murder weapon was located. In addition, he admitted that he had driven the ex's car to the town beach. Thus, the sister realized that Nathaniel was involved in the incident and persuaded him to turn himself in. It turned out that in 2009, when the young people broke up once again, there was one curious incident. Lauren, together with her friends, went to the disco. There was a guy who did not hide his interest in her. After the breakup, Lauren decided to give a chance to a new admirer, and they even kissed. But Nathan saw this and lunged at his rival with his fists. He threatened to slit the young man's throat if he ever came near Lauren again. So it was clear that Nathan was a jealous man. And when he drank alcohol, he lost his temper and became capable of many things, especially given the nature of the injuries Lauren had sustained as a result of the murder. This event confirmed Fujita's violent rage and also indirectly pointed to him as the culprit. In addition, other heinous circumstances came to light. The body of the deceased was found to have wounds that had been inflicted before her death. Among them, there were clear signs of so-called defensive wounds. The girl had tried to resist. A forensic psychiatrist invited by the prosecution also assessed the defendant's condition. However, unlike the previous one, he stated that at the time of the crime, he was in his right mind and made informed decisions. The fierce struggle between the prosecution and the defense came down to the fact that if Fujita was found insane, his sentence would be significantly reduced. Of course, this did not absolve him of the charges, but it did greatly diminish his guilt. This trial was emotional in every sense. In attendance were relatives on both sides. These men had previously been friends with each other. In this situation, they were each hurting in their own way. Nathaniel's parents cried the whole time. They could not believe what had happened and felt immense guilt for their son. The weight of his actions fell on the shoulders of his loved ones. Mary and Malcolm were heartbroken. They had lost their only daughter prematurely. Lauren was dying in agony at the hands of the man she loved. Specialists concluded that the girl had lived for several minutes after the was tightened and cut. Lauren's mother wanted to understand why this had happened to her daughter and how long it had been planned, the verdict and life afterward. After a 3-week trial, on March 7, 2013, Nathaniel Fujita was found guilty on all charges. The jury took 1 day to reach a final verdict. The 20-year-old was sentenced to life in prison without parole. After the verdict, Lauren's father walked up to Nathan's parents and hugged them. His act showed the strength of the man's character and the depth of his heart. Both families had lost the most precious thing they had. Mary and Malcolm Astley later established the Lauren Dunn Astley Memorial Fund to teach teens about healthy relationships. They believed that the crime Nathaniel committed was preventable. The girl's family has dedicated their future lives to spreading awareness on how to avoid couple violence and get over a breakup. In 2024, the state superior court abolished mandatory life without parole sentences for those under the age of 20 at the time of the offense. Thus, Nathaniel had the opportunity to be free. Is that fair? Considering that he took the life of an innocent girl forever and deprived her parents of happiness and peace. There is an opinion that from love to hate is one step. Obsessive love combined with bouts of jealousy and selfishness sometimes leads to crazy acts. The story of the Fujita and Astley families is a sad example of this. Inevitability: when one person goes missing, it's always a tragedy for their family. But imagine the horror that befalls the loved ones if an entire family disappears. And if there are children involved, the grief is indescribable. Matters concerning the life and health of children are always perceived with a special sensitivity. They are innocent from birth. Unfortunately, there are times when these little angels suffer and bear responsibilities just as adults do. A complicated situation unfolded in the fall of 2013 in Deltona, Florida, USA, involving the family of Yesenia Suarez and Luis Toledo. The 28-year-old mother vanished along with her children, 9-year-old Talia and 8-year-old Michael Otto. Law enforcement officers began the search and investigation into the disappearance immediately. However, the clues discovered soon left the seasoned officers astonished. What happened overnight from October 22nd to October 23rd is shrouded in mystery and defies all logic. Disappearance: the next morning, Felicita Perez, the mother of the main character, waited for her usual call. Yesenia called her every day between 8:30 and 9 a.m., but this time there was no call. The elderly woman grew concerned, as such behavior was out of character for her daughter. Over the next 2 hours, she tried to make contact, but all attempts were futile. The mobile phone of the person being called was turned off. Felicita then called the school where her grandchildren attended. However, the administration informed her that the children had not arrived for classes. The mother's concern grew. Around 11 a.m., she decided to visit Yesenia's home, but nobody answered the door. After this, the worried woman sought help from the police. The compelling arguments she presented convinced the officers to respond to the message. Upon arriving at Yesenia's residence, police officers began inspecting the house and the area. Soon after, 35-year-old Luis, the husband of the missing woman, arrived. He seemed surprised to find law enforcement at his home and initially expressed indignation. However, once he learned the reasons for their presence, he softened. During the conversation, the man mentioned that he last saw his wife and children the night before. After a minor argument, she packed some belongings and left, saying nothing to him. The family was on the verge of divorce, so after another quarrel, he spent the night in the car. By morning, the house was empty. Toledo stated that he was deeply saddened that after years together, his wife did not even bother to say goodbye. His words were credible. He also gave permission for a search. Inside the except for scattered children's toys, everything was orderly. No signs of forced entry or struggle were detected. It seemed quite possible that the young woman left at the first opportunity along with her children. Also missing were her second car, a 2013 Honda Accord, as well as her personal items, documents, and mobile phone. Nevertheless, there were elements that raised concerns. Firstly, Suarez was very close to her relatives. Therefore, she would not have kept them in the dark and would have informed them of her plans or current whereabouts. Secondly, a peculiar smell lingered in the house, especially strong in the bedroom, bathroom, and the hallway leading from it. At places, the smell of cleaning products mixed with the scent of vinegar. This led detectives to two conclusions. Either the homeowners were exceptionally clean or someone was attempting to destroy evidence of a crime that had occurred there. Thirdly, Felicitas' account raised suspicions. She had previously told the police that on October 22nd, a terrible argument occurred between Yesenia and Luis, during which he showed aggression and struck her daughter. Finally, neighbors of the couple, who had gathered at the arrival of the police, reported strange noises coming from the house under investigation. Witnesses explained that they heard something resembling a scream around 2 a.m., but did not attach any significance to it. Altercations among teenagers in this area were not uncommon. Therefore, only when law enforcement arrived did they realize that something extraordinary had happened. On the brink of collapse, subsequent investigations shed light on the details of the argument mentioned by the mother of the missing woman and her children. Luis suspected his wife of infidelity and had installed a tracking program on her phone. This led him to discover an affair between Yesenia and her colleague, Kevin Dren. On October 22nd, the distraught husband confronted his wife at her workplace, publicly accused her of infidelity, and slapped her. He then declared he would not hinder the lovers further. During the conflict, one of the organization's employees called emergency services to report the incident. However, Toledo left the building before the police arrived. The officers interviewed Suarez, who admitted that she often experienced such uncontrollable behavior from her husband, but had never sought help. Her statements were documented and recorded. After work, Yesenia visited her mother's house, where her children were waiting. They had dinner together, after which Toledo called her. Felicita recounted hearing about their conversation. Luis apologized and pleaded not to press charges against him. He also warned that something unpleasant might happen if she did not comply with his demands. It turns out the protagonist of the story had decided to obtain a restraining order against her husband. But after the call, she changed her mind, explaining to her family that it would only make things worse. Late in the evening, Toledo came to his mother-in-law's house and spoke with the women. He was distraught, complaining that his marriage was falling apart. He expressed his love for his family and his desire not to lose them. Yesenia, however, was determined and declared that a divorce was imminent. After this, he left, to give him time to cool off and come to terms with the new reality. The woman initially decided to stay overnight at her parental home. Nevertheless, after meeting with her husband, she took the children and returned home. Unfortunately, this was the last time the mother saw her daughter and grandchildren. Arrest. Due to the incident at Suarez's office the day before and her subsequent disappearance, the police had solid grounds to arrest Luis. The man was shocked and appeared bewildered. At the station, he reiterated his version of the events that happened overnight. After arguing with his wife at her mother's house, he went to a neighbor's place, where he stayed until 1 a.m. He then decided to spend the night in his car to avoid further conflict. At 7 a.m., he returned home and found that no one was there. Despite this, the suspect remained calm and did not express any concern for the missing individuals. He explained this by his confidence that they would soon return or make contact. He claimed Yesenia was not the kind of person who kept others regularly informed, and the current situation was just a foolish coincidence. A love story. Yesenia and Luis met in 2009 during a street festival. They were immediately attracted to each other and quickly fell in love. However, their relationship was anything but harmonious. Everyone around them was convinced that the two were not suited for each other. Suarez had been through a failed marriage before. At 24, she found herself a single mother of 2 young children. Thus, she was determined to set up their lives in the most favorable way possible. She dreamed of providing them with a good education and a better future. To this end, she re-enrolled in college and took up a full-time job. Yesenia worked for an American canine detection service in Lake Mary, a company known for training dogs to work with military and police forces. Luis, in contrast to his partner, was older and just beginning to sort out his life. He had been convicted multiple times in the past and was a former member of the Latin Kings gang. Thanks to his disposition and well-honed fighting skills, he had once held a leading position within the group. However, after turning state's evidence and betraying his peers, he lost his former influence and respect. Therefore, Toledo left the gang, turned away from his criminal past, and enrolled in college for barber training. He even got baptized and started attending church. Luis emerged as a sociable and caring person who tried to help everyone. After meeting Yesenia, he transformed completely. He became a loving and tender partner to her and a caring stepfather to her children. All the neighbors spoke highly of him. They often saw him spending time with his family and playing with the kids in the yard. The young couple got married on the first day of 2011. Although their relationship was initially happy, over time, everything changed. Respect and understanding faded away. Luis began to spend a lot of time on video games and neglected his family duties. It seemed all his attention had shifted to the virtual world. His wife repeatedly expressed her grievances, but the situation would only improve temporarily. Felicita often visited the couple since she lived just a few blocks away. Therefore, she was well aware of everything happening in her daughter's life. Gradually, the number of arguments in the family increased. Toledo genuinely did not understand what was expected of him and why they couldn't live as before. One day, he became so angry that he physically lashed out at his wife. After this, their marriage began to crumble. Eyewitnesses after Luis was detained, detectives began interviewing relatives and acquaintances of the missing family. They also contacted Yesenia's lover, Kevin. He reported that he had spoken with her late on the evening of October 22nd. He called to check on her, concerned that she might be in an incident at work. During the conversation, Suarez seemed tense, but she assured him that everything was fine and that it would just take some time to settle down. Sometimes her voice sounded unclear, which made him think that she might have had a drink. Their conversation lasted about 5 minutes. At the end, Yesenia wished him a good night and said goodbye. It was clear that Kevin did not know where she was, and was genuinely worried that something irreparable might have happened to her. Later, a call came into the police station from Jackson Titian, a neighbor of the suspect. The young man lived with his mother across the street and had inadvertently witnessed the events unfold. He reported that at 6 a.m., Luis came to him asking for help with a task. He needed to pick up a neighbor on his way back from Lake Mary, but he did not explain why. Meanwhile, Toledo got into Yesenia's car, leading the student to assume that her vehicle needed repair and they were heading to a garage. However, the reality was different from what he had imagined. They drove for about 30 minutes and then stopped in the parking lot of a large supermarket. Luis got out and started cleaning the interior of the car. Jackson noticed how thoroughly he wiped down the cabin, all the doors and windows using a cleaning agent. Afterwards, he put the car mats, a rag and gloves into a bag and then disposed of the bundle in a trash container. At that moment, the eyewitness did not understand what was happening and felt mixed emotions. He began to suspect that something serious had occurred the night before. Yet, on the other hand, if Toledo was hiding something, why would he take him along? After leaving Yesenia's vehicle, the men headed back. This time, Luis drove while Tizhan was sent to the back seat. The ride back to Delton was silent. Unable to bear the tension, Jackson finally asked what had happened. The neighbor simply replied that he had lost his temper and refused to explain further. The incident occupied the 20-year-old student's mind all morning, but after hearing rumors about the family's disappearance, he pieced together the events and immediately called the police. Later, the young man was questioned in the office and confirmed everything he had said on the phone. He then directed law enforcement officers to the location of the sought-after vehicle and the container where Luis had discarded the items. Armed with Jackson's testimony, detectives summoned Toledo. Everyone hoped to see Yesenia and her children alive, so they hoped the alleged criminal would confess sooner rather than later. Therefore, they informed him of everything the neighbor had reported and asked him to comment on these statements. However, the suspect suggested that the law enforcement officers were bluffing and refused to engage in conversation. Investigation detectives knew that solid evidence was needed for substantial accusations. So they didn't rush things and instead headed to the parking lot. The sought-after car was indeed there, but it was empty. However, Yesenia's personal belongings were found inside. Her purse, Idaho card, wallet, work pass, and mobile phone. Forensic experts examined the vehicle for DNA, blood, or fingerprints, but were unable to find anything conclusive. The experts stated that this was because the car had been cleaned thoroughly. Later, it was discovered that the garage keys still bore a single fingerprint, which turned out to be the suspect's. In the trash bin that Tishon had pointed out, they found a bag containing cleaning supplies, a rag, and some clothing. Additionally, bloodstains were found on the discarded mats and men's shoes. A wet shower curtain, and the same cleaning products were then found in a container near the couple's home. When the house was thoroughly inspected, it was difficult to find any traces. However, experts were able to find a few stains in the bathroom. Blood spatters were found on the cabinet doors and on the floor under the bathtub. DNA analysis determined that they belonged to Talia and Michael. After this discovery, the lead detective expressed doubt that the missing persons would be found alive. Nevertheless, the search continued. The operation involved relatives and acquaintances of Yesenia, as well as numerous volunteers. They searched everywhere using dogs and divers, but to no avail. It became obvious that the only person who could give any information was Luis, but he continued to remain silent. Confession eventually. During the third interrogation, Toledo cracked and confessed to Yesenia's death. However, he continued to deny that he had harmed the children. He recounted that Jackson Tishon had come over to his house in the evening to play video games. Suddenly, his wife and children appeared on the doorstep. She no longer liked his games and was even more upset by the events of the day, so she demanded that they leave. But when Luis refused, Yesenia walked up to him and started shaking him by the shoulders. To make her stop, he punched her in the neck. Unfortunately, he didn't calculate the force and the blow proved fatal. She couldn't breathe. I could see her gasping for breath and I couldn't do anything to help. She ended up dying looking at me. The suspect finished his story. The detective then provocatively asked, "Do you miss your children? Would you trade places with them?" Toledo nodded silently. The investigator then asked him to explain how they died. The suspect's behavior changed, and he stated that they were massacred by a neighbor who was present. After Yesenia's death, Talia and Michael ran into the room. They saw their mother lying on the floor and began screaming. Luis therefore asked Jackson to take them to another place. However, he soon heard loud noises and followed them into the bathroom. When he looked inside, he saw that they were lying on the floor and the neighbor was holding an axe. Luis burst into tears. The man added that after the incident, he was in shock and lost all self-awareness, and Jackson took advantage of the situation and got rid of the bodies. There was silence in the interrogation room. The last hope of finding the missing alive was gone. All that remained was to find the bodies, but the likelihood of finding them was rapidly diminishing. The detectives doubted the man's sincerity. Nevertheless, his claims had to be verified. So Jackson Tishon was questioned again. He was immediately told the neighbor's version of events. The young man stated that after returning home from college, he never went out again. He also noted that he had no reason to end the lives of Yesenia or Michael and Talia. Moreover, he personally went to the police and reported the incident. Soon his alibi was confirmed. He was cleared of suspicion and released home. The desire to end it all. The search for Yesenia, Michael, and Talia continued relentlessly. Despite considerable public attention and the large number of people involved, the efforts were unsuccessful. Every neighborhood was combed, including woods, bodies of water, and local landfills, all to no avail. Detectives feared that without the bodies, there might not be enough evidence to convict. However, something unexpected soon happened. During one of the routine interrogations, Toledo asked to use the restroom. Accompanied by several officers, since the restroom was at the other end of the building, they had to walk a short distance. During this walk, the detainee asked for a favor. He wanted to be taken home so that he could end his life. Understandably, he was not released. Instead, Luis asked the officers to remove his handcuffs so they could shoot him as if he were trying to escape. This bizarre request was also ignored. In response, one of the officers asked where his family's bodies were. Toledo muttered that he would never reveal that information. When the detainee entered the restroom, he managed to close the door behind him. Soon there was the sound of breaking glass. It turned out that the suspect had broken the mirror over the sink and used the shards to slash his wrists. He was clearly determined to end his life and was doing everything he could to do so, but it was unclear what was driving him. Was it guilt and remorse for what had happened or fear of the punishment awaiting him? Later, he did give an explanation for his actions. The policeman broke down the door and pulled out the bloody man, whose devious plan had failed. He received timely medical attention and his life was not threatened. However, the detainee's behavior revealed much. It turned out that he feared retaliation from his former colleagues, who traditionally had an unkind attitude toward those who harm children, unlike their attitude toward unfaithful spouses. Luis realized that if he ended up in prison, he was in for a rough ride. His past convictions when he turned in the Latin King's leaders and the new murder charges would weigh heavily against him. This was confirmed by the contents of his letters sent during the investigation. In one of them, he expressed his desire to tell the whole truth but could not, as it would be used against him. He reminded everyone that Yesenia had been unfaithful to him and added that he would never harm the children in any way. "I love them more than anything and continue to love them to this day," he wrote. On October 28th, Luis was charged with Yesenia's murder and the following January with the murders of Michael and Talia. The prosecution did not rule out that a third person was involved in the crime and helped the accused dispose of the bodies. Given his past criminal experience, Toledo also knew how to clean up a crime scene professionally on his own. Justice has been served. The trial of the man took place in 2017. The prosecutor argued that the accused committed the crime out of jealousy. However, he did not confess to ending the lives of Talia and Michael, since there was no justification for such actions. Therefore, Luis came up with an absurd story involving a neighbor. Kimberly LaSanta, Toledo's sister-in-law, testified in favor of the prosecution. She told the court that because of numerous threats from him, she obtained a restraining order against him. She claimed that Luis had previously sent her text messages threatening to take the children and send someone to harm her. At trial, she testified to her constant fear of him and produced the saved text messages. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to incriminate Jackson Tyken, resulting in a lie detector test and searches of his home and car, though nothing incriminating was found. That day, Jackson was indeed troubled by Luis's erratic behavior. Luis looked tense and scared, but Jackson didn't bother to get to the bottom of it because he couldn't imagine the horrible events that had transpired. Felicita and the children's biological father attended the trial. Relatives of the victims seemed overwhelmed with grief and were almost ready to confront Toledo in the courtroom. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found the defendant guilty of second-degree murder in the case of Yesenia and first-degree murder in the case of Talia and Michael. Luis was sentenced to 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. Interestingly, he initially asked for the death penalty, explaining that death row inmates do not face other inmates, and therefore he would not face retaliation from former gang members with whom he was once associated. The defendant knew that there was a bounty on his head and that he would suffer for the rest of his life. Everyone but the defense was convinced that Toledo had no remorse for his actions, but was simply afraid of what awaited him after the trial. The relatives of the victims were satisfied with the verdict. Outcomes: it is known that Yesenia and her children were active members of the Spanish-speaking Seventh-day Adventist church community in Deltona. The mother was studying at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. In spring 2014, she was expected to graduate with honors with a bachelor's degree in human resources management. After her disappearance, the college posthumously awarded her the degree. As of April 2024, the convicted Toledo continues to serve his sentence. He claims that he did not interrupt Talia and Michael's lives and does not know the whereabouts of their bodies. In one of the letters written from prison, he appears to have coded the message, writing that he sent 3 boxes, 1 large and 2 small ones. The large package reached its destination and the 2 small ones were fine. He added that he cared about what happens to him next, but he was innocent of the charges against him. Perhaps in this way, he wanted to let his acquaintances know that his conscience was clear and he should not be punished. Nevertheless, the evidence was against him. Even the fact that he had previously served 4 years for burglary, robbery, and kidnapping spoke volumes. It is possible that he did lose control of himself and committed inexplicable acts. Experience shows that those who embark on a criminal path rarely get off it. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.